Something that I find really fascinating to think about is how disconnected people have become from the sources of things, from how our clothes are produced, and from how our food is produced. We are pretty familiar with how the product gets from the store to our house, but there's a long backstory there that people are usually pretty unfamiliar with. So, in the next few minutes, we're going to be looking specifically at industrial animal farming, what it is, and what it looks like. An industrial animal farm is one that has really a lot of animals densely packed. There's usually modern machinery and really high output. This practice of intensive production began in the mid 20th century when human population was increasing. The proportion, like the percentage of each individual's diet that is consisted of animal products, also was increasing. Modern technologies were developed, and so industrial animal farms began to pop up. And while small local family farms still do exist, the vast majority of animal products that are sold commercially or used for commercial production are sourced from industrial animal farms. And this practice, it grew rapidly. And to help demonstrate this, I have some data from a 15-year period between 1997 and 2012. So between these years, the number of dairy cows that were produced more than doubled. Hogs increased by about almost 50%. Broiler chickens, the ones raised for their meat, their production increased by it almost doubled. And chickens raised for eggs, their production also increased by more than 25%. So, okay, we're farming these animals, we're farming a lot of them, but what do the conditions really look like? Animals in industrial farms are kept very close, tightly packed together. There's not very much space for each individual. Even if they're in a big barn that has a lot of space, there's so many animals in there that each individual doesn't have all that much space. They're often subject to mutilations such as tail docking or castration or beak trimming without the benefit of anesthetics. And while these practices are often defended as saying, oh, well, it helps with things such as aggression or such as cleanliness, that may be true, but these issues could be solved at their root level by improving living conditions in the first place. They are often made to live in their own waste, and they develop sores and open wounds very frequently, which makes them really susceptible to infection. And we don't give them very good food, so the animals are often malnourished. And because of selective breeding and genetic engineering, we have altered the genetics of these animals in a way that is more profitable, but that does not keep the animal welfare in mind. And so often the genetic engineering, the selective breeding, is to the animal's detriment. Also, animals are slaughtered at very young ages. For example, if you look at dairy cows, left alone, naturally, a dairy cow could live for up to 25 years, but we tend to slaughter them at a mere 4 years of age. The slaughter process, we try and stun them so that they're rendered unconscious before they're sent to slaughter. One frequent practice is to use electrocution, but this practice doesn't always work, and so when an animal isn't rendered unconscious, it may be caught by a backup killer who's standing there with a knife to check, is this animal unconscious? No, okay. Or they're left to bleed out, they're left conscious for up to minutes as they bleed out, or maybe they are burned and drowned to death in the next step of the process when they're pulled through boiling vats of water with little rubber fingers spinning to pull out their hair and feathers. And animals that are raised byproducts, such as milk and eggs, they're not really that much better off. They are also raised in the same packed and dirty conditions. They are also oftentimes malnourished. And for milk production, for example, the animal needs to be pregnant in order to start producing milk. So they are artificially inseminated. Animals in industrial farms aren't even afforded their own preferences and natural rhythms for mating. And then once they do have the baby, if we're talking about cows, for example, once they do have their calf, because we don't want the calf to drink the milk from the mother, we want to package that and sell it. They have about a few hours together, and then the calf is removed. And if it's a male, it maybe is raised for a few months and then sold for meat. If it's a female, it's just put into the same process of being impregnated and then milked. And so yeah, then we milk the cow for as long as we can, and then when it starts to stop producing as much milk, we just impregnate it again, and then do that process for about 4 years again, and then send it to slaughter. For chickens or animals we're raising for eggs, they naturally would not be laying eggs every day, but because of genetic engineering, chickens lay at least one egg every day, so that puts a lot of strain on them. And because we're just constantly pumping these byproducts out of these animals, their productivity wanes a lot sooner than it would in the natural world. So once they become less profitable, they are also sent off to slaughter. And male babies are not as beneficial to the market, usually to the industry. So for pigs and chickens, for example, a lot of times these animals are, if they're male, they're just thrown into industrial shredders as babies, or sometimes even thrown in the trash can, or they're gassed to death because they're just not useful to the industry. So in their first few days of life, they are just killed. It's important to pay attention to or to think about animal welfare because it has been observed and it has been proven that animals are capable of feeling physical and psychological pain and suffering. And I have seen examples of this myself when I was living in Germany as an exchange student. I lived with a host family for a while who actually rescued some animals from industrial farms. And I went with them one day to pick up a group of chickens. These chickens were all just living really close together in a wire crate. They were covered in poop and dirt. They had like bald spots where they were just missing patches of feathers. They had a bunch of broken feathers, and they had open wounds and sores all over the place, but specifically, frequently they had open wounds on their chest from just sitting all day, every day on this wire crate, and also on their feet from the constant contact with the wire. And their feet were incredibly swollen. It looked really strange how swollen the feet were. And I was with this family for a few months. We named the chickens, we took care of them. I remember giving them iodine foot baths to try and help their wounds heal. And after a few months, a lot of the chickens, they did recover. Most of the egg-laying chickens that we got, they survived. But most of the broiler chickens, the ones raised for meat, not many of them survived. Because of how we have selectively bred them and genetically engineered the animals, they have grown in a way that their bodies can't keep up with its own growth. Their breast grows so heavy and that they're not even able to get up and walk because they're just sitting all day. They can't even stretch out their legs because their tendons get so tight. I remember my host mom trying to do physical therapy with the legs on some of the chickens, but because the tendons were so tight, they couldn't even stretch their legs out all the way. Breathing became an issue because, again, the breast just took up so much space in the chest, and because of the constant sitting put pressure on the lungs, and so that made it difficult to breathe. The rapid growth rate of the chickens put strain on the heart, And so some of these animals died from heart problems, some of them died from difficulty breathing or whatever other issues arise. We tried taking some of the animals to the vet, but we were basically told that because of how they were bred, these animals were born to be killed at a young age to be eaten, and basically they were born to die. I think that we deserve to have an understanding of what we are supporting when we buy things at the store and what we're putting in our body when we eat the food. But in this modern industrial global market, it can be really difficult to keep in touch with uh, what these things are and what we're buying. And sometimes the companies, they know that it's kind of uncomfortable for us to think about, so they don't necessarily want to be forthcoming with it. And sometimes they'll even put labels on their food such as, oh, free range. But a lot of times these labels have really vague regulations, or they're really poorly enforced, and so it gives the consumer an idea that isn't necessarily matched up with reality. So those types of labels don't even really mean that much. And yeah, so it can be really difficult to keep in an understanding of what these things are that we're buying, how they're produced, what implications it all might have. And frankly, it can be really uncomfortable to think about. But I hope that this presentation has helped to shed a bit of light on one type of production backstory.